Hello and welcome to my first bullet journal flip through. The front of the bullet journal says Italia because it was a random notebook I got. It's not because I am Italian or anything. So here is my index, and this page ended up looking terrible, so I ended up redoing it on the next page. And the third index page is everything in the back of the book so that I could keep up with those. This key I ended up not keeping at all whatsoever. It was a wasted page, and so were the goals. I did not accomplish really any of those. However, things I did like was like my reading list and things like that, so I kept those into my next bullet journal. Here is the future log, and I tried to do a Monday to Sunday calendar, but when you are raised using Sunday to Saturday, it's hard to make the switch. And on to March. This was my very first monthly I ever did. My habit tracker, my expenses, and all that have terrible line work. I do not suggest a completely blank page to use for a bullet journal unless you're very good at drawing straight lines, which I am not. So essentially, my first month ended up being very messy. I had collection pages throughout. And I don't necessarily like this. I wish all of my collection pages were at the front, but oh well, I've lived and learned at this point. But yeah, as you can see, everything's really messy. I ended up putting my lesson plans in here, which I dropped after March because they ended up changing so much. It just made the bullet journal look absolutely terrible. But with my weeklies and all that, I ended up changing up the layouts. I didn't exactly know what I wanted to use just yet. In this font page, I haven't used these stylized headings and stuff like that since this bullet journal. So yeah. And as you can see, I put random collection pages throughout. So like washi tapes, movies, face routine, which I did not keep up with. And on to April, my favorite month of the year because it's my birthday month. But this type of style I kept for the rest of this bullet journal, with like a calendar layout, notes, and a habit tracker. And this expense tracker is the same thing throughout. Now with April, I ended up doing something I've learned not to do, is I planned out all of the weeklies at the very beginning of the month, which doesn't help because I couldn't change the layouts to anything that I felt inspired to use. So sometimes I wasn't using the bullet journal. But one thing I did like that I did here was the water tracker, and the colored boxes are things that aren't water. But here is my first trip planning page, which I just used a pen. I didn't draw anything, make it pretty or anything. I just needed it quick and fast. And one thing I've definitely learned is brain dump pages don't really help me. I've just fallen out of use for those. And here is a tracker for my purchases. And my spring schedule. This is taped in because my schedule changed literally so much that it just ended up ruining this page. And I spent so much money in April, I had to extend the expense tracker. So that was fun. But here is my first stylized trip page. And I still kind of do these in my bullet journal. Here is May. And in May, I ended up having this pretty paper that I ended up cutting designs out of and used throughout to decorate. And I ended up doing the brain dump. This habit tracker is not to keep track of anything. It's a monthly review. And then, of course, my expense trackers. These things take forever to draw. This was the first sleeping log I ever did, and I wrote that out by hand, which I don't suggest doing. And then I tried to do a monthly challenge, 31 days of journaling, which did not happen. And this is my first weekly, and this is where I really changed up the layout. I ended up doing weekly trackers, which helped a lot. And then on the right side, I did my dailies. So I would write down the day and the day's number, the date, that's what that's called, a date, and wrote down the task I needed done for that day. Now, because my expense trackers expand, I ended up having to do major spending pages so that I could write down individual things. But I ended up keeping this style for May and June. Now, all my other time tracking stuff I tried to do at this point just failed because When you try to track too many things and you're not used to tracking small things on a daily basis, it just falls apart. So I suggest only tracking a few things at a time. And here is a future log because this bullet journal ended up lasting me a lot longer. In June, this was a very experimental time because I tried to draw and I'm not a good artist. But this was my favorite color scheme, which is strange because my favorite color is literally pink. So this style that I created in May of the calendar and then the important dates next to it, I kept essentially the rest of this bullet journal. And another useless brain dump page. Habit trackers stayed to be a monthly review. In this expense tracker, I don't know why I didn't create something like I did with the sleep tracker and printed it out and pasted it. I ended up drawing the expense trackers by hand every time. But I tried another challenge and almost made it. I made it to 26 days here, which was much better than my journaling try. But for this one, I was going home. I needed my souvenir. So a lot of this was planning to leave China. And I did my major spending page at the beginning here, so it wasn't like just in the middle of the month. But yeah, this ugly boat was for the Dragon Boat Festival. I'm not an artist, as I've stated before. But yeah, like this definitely was my favoriteest color scheme because I have so many blue things that just went well with each other. So I really enjoyed this color scheme. And my last week of working. So mainly this one ended up looking like everything else, but I don't think I actually kept up with everything properly. If I remember correctly, I filled this out like after the week was already over. And then when I returned to America, I tried to track what I was doing. And I tried to do this almost for the rest of the summer. But as you can see here, it fell apart a little bit. The July theme ended up being inspired by someone else, but I don't remember who it was. But if you know it, please tell me. But I was smart enough to print out this sleep tracker enough times to last me for a while. And then I gave up drawing the expense tracker lines, and I didn't spend that much money in America because thankfully my parents did it for me. But I took inspiration from Bujo journal inspiration? I can't remember her name right now. But she does a weekly and then a daily section. So I ended up taking inspiration from her when she does her reads for her weeklies. So this ended up being just trying to track things. I didn't really have too much to do during the summer. And I tried to track my meals so that I wouldn't eat too much, but that failed completely. When you're home and bored, I can't drive. So you're home, you're bored, you can't do anything, you just eat, and that's a terrible way to do it. But yeah, that was July, and in August, I ended up becoming a kidnapper, apparently, and ended up writing my letters like ransom notes. But I chose pink for August. I'm not quite sure why. But yeah, I gave up with drawing pretty lines and stuff. And I actually had a lot of fun with this month because, again, pink is my favorite color. But I was going back to China, so I needed to plan everything out. This has by far my favorite weekly I've ever done. That bright pink was just beautiful to me. And then I ended up giving up on meal tracking. It just did not work. And this is my least favorite weekly. This color, the marker style, the ink just was terrible. But yeah, I ended up having fun with geometric shapes, and every week ended up being a different thing. And in this week, I flew back to China, so I didn't really have tasks and things like that. And in most of my bullet journals, I only have two, there are blank pages at the end because you can't fill everything out. And in the very back are just extra list of things that I wanted to do collections wise because I thought putting them in the back would help me. Most of them are not filled out properly, or they're just scratch pages to, plan out weeklies and stuff like that. One page I always keep though is the pins test page. Yeah, here's the back of my bullet journal. And so thank you for watching, and this was my very first bullet journal.